In the final hours of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler named an unlikely successor, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz. For 20 critical days in May 1945, a naval officer, not a general or party official, held the highest office in a defeated regime, navigating surrender as millions fled the advancing front. Karl Dönitz was born on 16 September 1008, 191 in Grunau, a quiet district near Berlin. His family belonged to Germany's growing middle class, and like many young men of the era, he chose a military career path. In April 1910, he entered the Imperial German Navy, a force still expanding its reach under Kaiser Wilhelm Roman II. Dönitz completed officer training and soon received his first major assignment aboard the light cruiser SMS Breslau, then stationed in the Mediterranean. By 1914, when the First World War began, the Breslau and its partner ship Goeben were already at sea. Their escape to Constantinople and subsequent transfer to the Ottoman Navy became one of the most notable naval maneuvers of the war's opening days. For Dönitz, this period offered experience in high-pressure operations and complex diplomacy, but his real shift came in 1916 when he transferred to Germany's growing U-boat service, a branch that demanded technical skill and absolute composure. In January 1918, Dönitz received command of UB-68, a coastal submarine operating in the Mediterranean. His time as a commander was short but intense. On 4 October 1918, after mechanical failures left the boat unable to dive, UB-68 was forced to surface under fire from British warships. Dönitz ordered his crew to abandon ship before the submarine sank. He was taken prisoner and spent the rest of the war in a British POW camp. During this period, he wrote detailed notes on submarine tactics, early ideas that would later influence the concepts he introduced in the next war. Released in July 1919, Dönitz returned to a shattered Germany. The Reichsmarine, the Navy of the Weimar Republic, had been reduced to a fraction of its former strength by the Treaty of Versailles. He held several staff and training roles during the 1920s, focusing on gunnery, signals, and ship operations. Although submarines were banned under Versailles, the German Navy continued to explore them covertly through partnerships and research abroad. Officers like Dönitz remained quietly connected to the concepts, even when official programs did not exist. By the early 1930s, Dönitz had become a respected figure within the Reichsmarine, known for discipline, technical skill, and an interest in submarine operations, even when official programs were forbidden. As Germany began to rearm under Hitler, the Navy looked for officers who could lead a rebuilt U-boat force. When Karl Dönitz became commander of the submarines, he inherited a small submarine arm that was still rebuilding after years of restrictions. Germany possessed only a handful of operational U-boats, but Dönitz had a clear vision, a modern submarine fleet built around coordination, discipline, and concentrated attack. He believed Germany needed at least 300 submarines to wage an effective naval campaign, far more than political leaders or industrial planners were prepared to deliver. Dönitz's most influential contribution was the development of Rudeltaktik, or wolf-pack tactics. Instead of operating alone, submarines would patrol across wide areas, report convoy sightings, and then regroup for coordinated night attacks. This demanded constant radio communication and rapid decision-making from command headquarters. It also required a large enough fleet to sustain losses while maintaining pressure across the Atlantic. Dönitz built his doctrine around speed, surprise, and centralized control, principles that later defined the first years of the Battle of the Atlantic. When war began on 1 September 1939, Germany had only 57 U-boats, with fewer than half ready for long-range operations. Despite the limited numbers, early successes gave Dönitz influence within the naval leadership. U-boat crews operated from traditional bases in Wilhelmshaven, Kiel, and Helgoland, but the fall of France in June 1940 transformed the campaign. German forces captured Atlantic ports such as Lorient, Brest, La Rochelle, and Saint-Nazaire, allowing U-boats to reach the open ocean within hours instead of days. These bases became central to the U-boat war, protected by reinforced submarine pens built to withstand bombing. Dönitz rose quickly through the ranks. He became Rear Admiral in 1939, Vice Admiral in 1940, and Admiral in 1942. In January 1943, after disagreements between Hitler and the long-serving naval commander Erich Raeder, Dönitz replaced him as Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine. The appointment reflected both Hitler's trust in him and the growing importance Hitler placed on submarine warfare. By 1941 and 1942, the U-boat arm reached what crews called the happy time, when convoys lacked adequate escort protection. But the situation changed rapidly in 1943. Advances in Allied radar systems, the breaking of German naval codes, improved air patrols, and new escort carriers dramatically increased losses. Germany lost more than 70 U-boats in May 1943 alone, a level of attrition that forced Dönitz to withdraw many boats from the North Atlantic. Despite these setbacks, Dönitz maintained a close relationship with Hitler, often briefing him directly. He became one of the few senior officers who retained the Führer's confidence in the final years of the conflict. His loyalty and measured communication style stood in sharp contrast to the internal rivalries that marked much of the Nazi leadership. Although Dönitz later presented himself as a non-political naval officer, his wartime record shows clear alignment with Nazi ideology. Several senior officers described him as strongly loyal to Hitler and supportive of National Socialism, and he encouraged these views within the Kriegsmarine. Dönitz joined the Nazi Party in February 1944 and received the Golden Party badge later that year. His speeches included explicit anti-Semitic language. He also blamed foreign decisions on what he called international Jewish capital. After 1945, Dönitz denied political involvement and stated he had no knowledge of the persecution of Jews, but his public statements during the war reflect firm ideological commitment. In the final days of April 1945, the Third Reich stood on the edge of collapse. Soviet forces surrounded Berlin, Allied troops pressed in from the west, and German command structures were breaking down. Inside the Führerbunker, Adolf Hitler drafted his political testament on 29 April, naming Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz as Reichspräsident, head of state, after his death. Hitler chose him over senior party figures for reasons that reflected the final state of the regime. Dönitz had remained loyal, avoided internal disputes, and maintained one of the few military structures still functioning as Germany collapsed. On 30 April 1945, Hitler died in Berlin. The news reached Dönitz that evening at Plön, on the Baltic coast. His first reaction was disbelief, but once the message was confirmed, he acted quickly. He moved his headquarters north to the Naval Academy at Marwijk, near Flensburg, where he could operate under the protection of remaining naval units. There, he formed the short-lived Flensburg Government, appointing Count Lutz Graf Schwerin von Krosigk as leading minister. Though nominally a government, it controlled almost no real territory and operated under constant Allied observation. Dönitz faced an impossible task: manage the final defeat of Germany while trying to protect millions of civilians and soldiers still in the East. His overriding objective during these 20 days was to facilitate the movement of German refugees and troops westward, to surrender to the British or Americans rather than fall into Soviet hands. On 4 May 1945, Dönitz authorized the partial surrender of German forces in northwest Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, but this did not end the war. Full capitulation required coordinated action across all fronts, and Allied commanders made clear that only an unconditional surrender would be accepted. On 7 May, German representatives led by General Alfred Jodl signed the surrender document at Reims, agreeing that all German forces would cease operations on 8 May 1945. Dönitz authorized this, realizing resistance was no longer possible. A second signing took place in Berlin, Karlshorst on 8-9 May, formalizing the act for the Soviet Union. The war in Europe was over. Despite the surrender, Dönitz attempted to keep his government functioning. The Allies allowed it to operate for 2 more weeks, mainly to maintain administrative stability in the occupied region around Flensburg. But by late May, its presence was seen as unnecessary and politically unacceptable. On 23 May 1945, British forces arrived at the Naval Academy in Marwijk. Officers entered the meeting room, informed Dönitz that his government was dissolved, and placed him under arrest along with key ministers. The last leader of Nazi Germany walked out of the building without ceremony, ending the brief existence of the Flensburg Government. After his arrest on 23 May 1945, Dönitz was transferred into Allied custody and soon became one of the major defendants at the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg. The charges against him covered two central areas: responsibility for planning and waging aggressive war, and the conduct of the U-boat campaign in violation of international law. Prosecutors emphasized his loyalty to Hitler, his leadership role within the Kriegsmarine, and several naval directives that encouraged uncompromising tactics at sea. One of the most scrutinized issues involved orders concerning the rescue of enemy survivors. In 1942, Dönitz had instructed submarine commanders to avoid rescue operations in dangerous conditions. Prosecutors claimed this encouraged unnecessary loss of life, though Dönitz argued that surfacing exposed U-boats to air attack and that similar practices had been adopted by other navies. Testimony from U.S. Admiral Chester Nimitz, who described comparable restrictions on American submarines, became a key factor. It did not absolve Dönitz, but helped refine the tribunal's judgment of his actions as part of broader naval realities rather than intentional cruelty. Nonetheless, the tribunal held him responsible for participating in the Nazi leadership's aggressive military policies. Although acquitted of the charge that he conducted unrestricted submarine warfare knowingly outside accepted norms, he was found guilty on 2 counts and sentenced to 10 years in prison on 1 October 1946. The court noted his deep involvement in the Nazi war effort, even if his political influence had been more limited than that of other defendants. Dönitz served his full sentence at Spandau prison in Berlin, a facility jointly administered by the 4 occupying powers. His time there was marked by strict routines, limited contact with the outside world, and occasional disagreements among the Allied administrators on prison policy. Unlike some other inmates, he rarely expressed regret for his wartime decisions. He focused instead on maintaining a disciplined daily structure, reading, writing, and corresponding within the limits allowed. Upon his release on 1 October 1956, Dönitz settled in Ormol, a quiet town in Schleswig-Holstein. He returned to public attention 2 years later with the publication of his memoir, 10 Jaar en 20 Tage, 10 Years and 20 Days. The book presented his wartime role as that of a dedicated naval officer focused on strategy rather than politics. Supporters viewed him as a symbol of professional military service, while critics argued that the memoir downplayed his loyalty to Hitler and ignored the moral consequences of the regime he served. Even after the Nuremberg trials, when the crimes of the Nazi regime were well known, Dönitz continued to express anti-Semitic views.